On April 27, 2007, a young woman is found dead at her home. She has been brutally murdered.
She was there, half naked, legs straight, facing us, with her head slightly bent towards the stairs and a pool of blood around her legs.
The victim, Gaëlle Fosset, was only 21 years old.
Gaëlle was very cheerful and never fought with anyone.
She was very pretty, but she was more than just that. She was very charming and sweet.
Who could hold a grudge against this young woman who led such a quiet life?
So many stab wounds. In most cases, it's someone who's completely insane. Dangerously insane.
Everyone knows each other. You don't expect such a horrible thing to happen in this village.
What could the killer's motives be?
He may have wanted to do things to her, and she didn't want to.
No evidence has come from questioning the neighbors.
Maybe they heard something, but they don't want to talk because they're afraid.
Several individuals have been taken into police custody. Some of them were under serious suspicion. But for now, Gaëlle Fosset's murder remains a mystery. We're in Saint-Germain-la-Campagne, a village with a population of 900 in the French department of Eure. Gaëlle Fosset was 21 years old. She had just left the family home to move in with her boyfriend in a residential neighborhood. One evening in April, while she was home alone, a killer came into her home and stabbed her 66 times. Despite the Rouen investigation unit's tireless work, Gaëlle's murderer still hasn't been identified. We're looking back at a case that remains unsolved to this day. On Friday, April 27, 2007, Jean-Paul Fosset, a baker in Orbec, is about to close his shop. Sylvie Fosset, his wife, looks out the window for the arrival of their daughter Gaëlle, who has borrowed their car.
Gaëlle was planning to come to the house to write a letter on my computer and to return our car. And she also had to do some shopping for her father.
But by 6:30 p.m., the 21-year-old still hasn't arrived. Gaëlle is usually never late. Her father remembers that evening.
At some point, my wife says, "This really isn't normal. Gaëlle gives us a call whenever there's a holdup, doesn't she? She always calls us, but she hasn't called."
Sylvie Fosset tries in vain to get in touch with her daughter, whose cell phone goes to voicemail. Around 7 p.m., she contacts Stephen, Gaëlle's boyfriend, to see if he has any news. But Stephen, who's away on business in Saint-Étienne, says he hasn't spoken to her in 24 hours.
When I was away on business, I would call Gaëlle every evening, either before dinner or when I got back to the hotel room so that we would have plenty of time to talk. Except that evening, I tried to call her, but I didn't get through. I thought maybe she's with a friend or something.
As the hours go by, the concern grows. At 10 p.m., Jean-Paul Fosset decides to go to his daughter's home in the neighboring village of Saint-Germain-la-Campagne. He asks Mireille Klin, a friend, to drive him.
We went first to one of her friend's houses to see if she was there, and then we headed to Saint-Germain to her place.
When they get there, Jean-Paul Fosset immediately spots her car in the driveway. He assumes that Gaëlle is home.
We go up to Gaëlle's house, and I ring the bell and knock. I hear the dog barking.
The young woman doesn't answer. Jean-Paul Fosset perseveres. He notices that the door is locked.
All the shutters, upstairs and downstairs, are closed. But the shutter on her bedroom window is slightly open. We see a light on, which seems normal. I could pick up some stones and throw them against the shutter. That said, she might be unwell or asleep. I don't know. Well, that reassures me at first, because after seeing her car, I feel better.
Jean-Paul Fosset goes back to his house in Orbec with Mireille to pick up a copy of his daughter's house keys. When they come back at 10:30 p.m., they see a young volunteer firefighter in front of Gaëlle's home.
But he said he was there because Stephen had called him to take a look, since he hadn't heard from her. Jean-Paul opened the door. He went inside.
I call the dog. I say, Rambo, Rambo. The dog doesn't come. So I turn on the light in the hall. Then I turn on the light in the kitchen. I hear the dog, who's at the back, in the storage room. I think, the dog shut away? This isn't normal. And then we go to the living room, and that's where we see Gaëlle. She was there, half naked, legs straight, facing us, with her head slightly bent towards the stairs and a pool of blood around her legs.
Faced with the horror of the scene, the young firefighter asked Jean-Paul and his friend Mireille to leave.
He told us to leave and not touch anything. I had put down my cell phone to go see Gaëlle, so we left. And he went back in, straight away. Then he closed the door. What did he do? We don't know.
Outside, in the dark, Gaëlle Fosset's father waits for the firefighter to tell him what's going on.
When he comes out, I ask him, what's wrong with Gaëlle? He says, I can't tell you. I say, no, you will tell me because I'm going to punch you in the face if you don't. He says, Gaëlle is dead. Gaëlle's dead? He says, yes. While she was doing housework, she must have fallen down the stairs and hit her head on the TV stand.
Jean-Paul Fosset refuses to accept that his daughter is dead.
I didn't want to believe him. I didn't get it. I said, no, it isn't possible. Gaëlle isn't dead. And then he told me, in any case, I've called an ambulance. An ambulance means there's still something there. But I didn't realize it yet. There was nothing. Then we saw the flashing lights, and he said, here's the ambulance. I said, that isn't an ambulance. Who did you call? Is that the police? He said, I called an ambulance.
At 11:03 p.m., the Bernay police force arrive at the scene. At the same time, Jean-Paul Fosset's phone rings. It's his wife.
She asked me, so what does Gaëlle have to say? How can I say this? I think, how can I tell her? I simply tell her, Gaëlle is dead. Because I can't find another way to say it.
All night I said no, it wasn't true. Everyone must be lying to me. And I remember saying again and again that it wasn't possible. We'd already lost our eldest daughter. We couldn't have lost another one.
Just under 400 miles away, Stephen is pacing around a hotel room in Saint-Étienne, waiting for news about his girlfriend. Sandra, his sister-in-law, calls him.
She asks me if I'm alone, and then she tells me that Gaëlle is dead. I lose it. I freak out. I'm crying. The first version I heard was that she had an accident at home. She might have fallen down the stairs, but nobody knew anything. That's the point.
After hearing the terrible news, Stephen's father joins Jean-Paul Fosset outside Gaëlle's house. The two bewildered men watch the Bernay police at work.
They would go through the door and look around, and then they'd go out again through the French door in the kitchen. Stephen's father and I were saying, something is wrong here because, look, they keep going in and coming back out. What is all this? But at the time, you don't think your daughter has just been murdered.
A family doctor from Lisieux arrives at the scene and confirms the victim is dead. The police receive a death certificate and put up a barricade tape. Gaëlle Fosset's loved ones still don't know that the investigators are leaning towards the theory of a criminal act. Access to the house is forbidden. At 10 to 1 in the morning, officers from the Bernay Investigation Unit are joined by forensic science technicians from the Évreux Police Force. Once inside the house, the forensic technicians notice there's no sign of forced entry. In the entrance hall, the door on the left leads to the kitchen, and the one on the right leads to the dining room, where there's a table with 4 chairs on top. The specialists enter this room and head to the living area. The victim is lying on the ground on her side, between the couch, the TV stand, and the coffee table. She's wearing only a bloody t-shirt. Her naked lower body has been covered by a dish towel by the volunteer firefighter who entered the house before the police arrived. A medical examiner is dispatched to the scene to collect the body. Julienne Lagarde, reporter for the weekly newspaper Le Pays d'Auge, recalls the preliminary findings.
The medical examiner sees that the victim has been killed by a dozen or so stab wounds. The exact number isn't known at first. She has wounds to her throat, her rib cage, her back, and her face too.
The medical examiner estimates her death occurred between yesterday evening and the morning of April 27, 2007. Gaëlle Fosset was the victim of an extremely brutal murder. Hugues Vigier Esquire is Sylvie and Jean-Paul Fosset's lawyer. He saw the horrific photos from the crime scene.
Around the body, there were sizable bloodstains, pools of blood. There was a lot of blood. Blood splatter on the furniture, on the walls.
Next to the body, there's a container of fabric softener, a broom, and a bucket. On the floor and the couch, traces of cleaning products suggest the murderer tried to clean up the crime scene. The forensic technicians continue to take samples.
There's glass and a large mug with traces of blood splatter, which seems to have been moved. So all of this, of course, is sealed.
3 feet from the victim's feet, the police find a pair of sweatpants. The sweatpants are sent to a forensic laboratory as they might bear the killer's DNA. While looking at the bloodstains, the forensic technicians work out that a piece of furniture in the living room has been moved.
For example, there's blood splatter on an armchair far away from where the initial blood is, which suggests the armchair was moved closer to the stairs.
Blood and hair samples are taken from the sofa armrest, as well as the coffee table. Manuel Canquis is a bloodstain pattern analysis expert. He has examined many crime scenes.
The most likely scenario is that the attack started on the couch, near the wall between the couch and the TV. Then the victim gradually fell onto the armrest and the coffee table and possibly made contact with the armchair, ending up in the position she was found in on the floor, where the stabs just kept on coming.
The investigations carry on in the kitchen.
In the sink, we also found a mop which we think could have been used for a hasty cleanup. It was found in water, which had stagnated.
The police unscrew the sink's U-bend and take out the contents. On top of the microwave, there's an ashtray containing 20 or so cigarette butts. Only one of them is Royal Polea, the brand that Gaëlle Fosset smoked. From the drawer beneath the counter, 3 knives are put into evidence bags. Specialists will have to determine if one of them is the murder weapon. In the utility room, the experts notice a bowl on the floor. This is where the Rottweiler was trapped for hours. The forensic technicians carry on with their inspection on the 2nd floor. In the bedroom, they find the bedside lamp and television left on. The bed is unmade. In this room, the sheets, pillow covers, and male underwear are collected as evidence. At the end of their search, the police discover that a set of keys is missing from the house.
The first set of keys is found on the kitchen table. This set belonged to Gaëlle. However, a second set of keys has disappeared. Its whereabouts are unknown.
From this night on, the police carry out an extensive search operation to find this set of keys. They also search for the murder weapon. Daniel Boulet, the mayor of Saint-Germain-la-Campagne, recalls these investigations, which went on for days.
Searches were carried out in and around the neighborhood, on roofs, in ditches, in gutters, in manholes, and elsewhere. Everywhere was searched. All the garbage was sorted through. I can still picture the tarps. It was done bag by bag. Everything was searched and sorted through.
The search turns up nothing. It's only the day after Gaëlle's body was found that Jean-Paul and Sylvie Fosset are officially informed that their daughter has been killed by multiple stab wounds.
It was extremely hard to talk about at first. I think each of us was on our own, and it was really very difficult. We didn't talk about it at all. We didn't speak to each other for several days, in fact.
We couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe it. And then when they tell you she was murdered, that's the second blow. When they tell you that, well,
Jean-Marc were in front of the detached house where Gaëlle Fosset moved in with her boyfriend only a few months before the tragedy. It was inside this house that Jean-Paul Fosset found his daughter lying in a pool of dried blood nearly 24 hours after her death. The medical examiner's initial findings from the victim's body left no doubt that her death was due to foul play. How do you explain the young volunteer firefighter who came with Gaëlle's father, thinking for a moment that it was a household accident?
He may have been trying to spare Jean-Paul Fosset from the painful truth that his daughter had just been brutally stabbed. But it is also possible that, not being a law enforcement professional, this young firefighter didn't immediately understand what had happened. Seeing a bucket, a broom, and a cleaning product, he may well have thought that Gaëlle died falling down the stairs while cleaning.
In fact, it would appear that these objects were used by the killer to try and clean the crime scene. In your opinion, why did he stop?
Perhaps he was afraid that the barking dog would alert the neighbors, or perhaps he simply realized that what he was doing was totally ineffective. Remember, the product he was using was a fabric softener.
Not exactly the ideal product to clean up a crime scene.
No, it suggests he was nervous, but he knew how to contain and overcome these nerves because he didn't leave any fingerprints or footprints.
When Jean-Paul Fosset arrived at his daughter's home, the front door was locked. In addition, the police noticed that a set of keys was missing. This means the killer must have taken them and locked the door behind him. Why did he take this precaution?
I think he needed to buy some time and delay discovery of the body. He needed time to get rid of the evidence. Evidence being his clothes, which were probably bloodstained, the murder weapon, and the set of keys he used to lock the door.
When he entered the house, Jean-Paul Fosset was immediately surprised to see the dog had been shut in the utility room. According to him, his daughter would never have done that. She always let him roam free in the house, which could suggest that it was the killer who trapped the Rottweiler. Knowing what this dog breed is like, that can't have been easy. Unless, of course, the assailant was a regular visitor.
You're getting a bit ahead of yourself there. First, not all Rottweilers are ferocious beasts. And above all, it's easy to imagine Gaëlle herself shutting her dog inside the utility room. Remember, when the police did their preliminary inspection, they noticed the chairs were on the table. It's perfectly conceivable that Gaëlle had just cleaned the living room floor and had shut away her dog while waiting for the floor to dry. That could explain the bucket and broom being there when she was murdered.
For now, the investigators aren't ruling out any theories, from an act of violence by a stranger to a crime committed by someone close to the victim. The police embark on a background investigation. They want to find out who Gaëlle Fosset was and what company she kept. Gaëlle Fosset was born on December 18, 1985, 5 years after her brother. This child, eagerly awaited by her parents, was always a joy to her family and friends.
She was a playful little girl who had a lot of energy. loved laughing, talking, and being surrounded by friends, and was always very, very happy.
As a little girl, Gaëlle loved playing shop at her parents' bakery.
She was interested in everything. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Sometimes she came to see me baking cakes. She wanted to tell me how to do my job. No, I would do it like this, I would do it like that.
As a teenager, she shared all her ups and downs with her mother. Sandra, her sister-in-law, often witnessed their conversations.
She was very close to her mom, very close. She really trusted her mom. Her mom knew a lot about Gaëlle, more than her father. They were thick as thieves. She knew about her first date. She knew about her first relationships, the first time she had sex. They were both very close.
I had a very special, very close relationship with Gaëlle. I was her mother, of course. But she knew I would never judge. She could tell me anything.
Jocelyne Coulage, Gaëlle's aunt, remembers this close relationship.
I can still see her, 21 years old, and on her mom's knee, giving her a hug.
Over the years, the cute little girl became a beautiful young woman. So beautiful that a photographer friend of her brother's asked her parents if he could take her portrait.
She was very pretty, but she was more than that. At least for me, she was more than that. I think she was always charming, sweet, and extremely feminine. Boys often stared at her, so she knew she was pretty. On top of that, we told her over and over from the moment she was born. So she was really popular.
The fact that she was pretty could arouse jealousy or desire. The sexual nature of this case was taken into consideration straight away, because we are indeed dealing with a very pretty woman.
At 17 years old, Gaëlle is a young woman with many admirers, including Stephen, a boy from her village.
She was pretty and dynamic, and since we hung out with the same people, I could approach her easily.
It was very clear that Stephen was very interested in Gaëlle. For a time, there was a bench outside our store, and he would sit there and spend the afternoons watching her. We nicknamed him Romeo.
Stephen managed to seduce Gaëlle. The young woman fell deeply in love.
She wanted it to become serious quite fast, and I think he got scared. They broke up. They got back together. They broke up again. They got back together again.
At that time, Gaëlle failed her exams and dropped out of school.
Gaëlle told us she'd had enough of school and she wanted to get a job. I think she had a plan in her head. She was very much in love with Stephen, and she wanted to play at being a grown-up couple. Stephen was working, and he had his own little house.
For a year, the young woman did a series of odd jobs to gain her independence. Under pressure from her parents, she agreed to take a training course in secretarial and accounting skills. Corinne Séguin, her teacher, recalls her enthusiasm.
One time she came to see me and said, "I finally found the job I want to do, whether in secretarial work or accounting." She really came into her own because she loved it so much. You could tell that she loved what she was doing.
She wasn't a big fan of going to school, but internships are more or less a way of starting real life. She was doing well. She was starting to earn some money and to finally become independent from her parents.
4 months before her death, Gaëlle and Stephen moved into a small house. She was very happy to finally live with the man she loved.
She was always sweet, smiling, lovable. Everything about her was lovable.
Jennifer, a friend of Gaëlle's, remembers the young woman's happiness.
Gaëlle was very cheerful and never fought with anyone. She never had a bad word to say, never clashed with anyone.
She was a great listener. She was very good-natured. She had it all.
Sylvie Fosset emotionally describes her final conversation with her daughter a week before the murder.
I remember I was over there washing the dishes, and she said, "You know, Mom, I've never been as happy as I am right now. Stephen is the love of my life." "Do you know what he told me?" I said to her. "He told me how happy he is to finally get home every weekend." And she said, "You can't imagine how happy that makes me." So I knew she was happy. It's even harder to think that at the time, she was happy with her life. Both of them were talking a bit about having kids, and I thought, great, everything is going well for them, and that's all we want.
We still talk about Gaëlle every day because we need to have her with us every day. We can't stop talking about her. Her mother and I talk about her every day. We go and see her every day. It's not that we enjoy going to the cemetery or anything, but we have to go and see Gaëlle.
Gaëlle Fosset was a happy and thriving young woman whose kindness is remembered by all her loved ones. Initial investigations had not uncovered any gray areas in her life that could explain her murder. The crime scene showed no sign of forced entry or apparent theft. To begin with, the main hypothesis is that she was murdered by someone close to her. So the police try to find out more about Stephen, Gaëlle's partner. When Stephen returns from Saint-Étienne, where he was away on business, the police are waiting for him.
I was met straight away by the police to be interviewed, so I went with the police. It wasn't even my parents who took me to the police station. I went in a police car.
The young man is interviewed right away. The police question him about his relationship with Gaëlle. They find out that the couple broke up 3 times.
I needed freedom. I was scared of commitment. I was pretty fickle at the start.
The investigators learned that during their last breakup over 18 months ago, Gaëlle had a relationship with one of her childhood friends, Eric Dupin.
I'll always remember our first kiss. We were leaving the bar where we had been playing pool. I took her home, like on the evenings when we used to chat, and then we kissed outside her parents' house.
She flirted with that friend. But yeah, it made me jealous straight away. As soon as I knew someone was chasing her, I came running back.
Sylvie Fosset is convinced her daughter wasn't in love with Eric Dupin. She adds that Stephen had no reason to be jealous.
Eric consoled her and was so nice to her that it was more of a question of gratitude than being really attracted to him.
Even so, the investigators continue probing the young couple's life together. Could Stephen have discovered a relationship Gaëlle was having behind his back? It's a plausible theory to the police, but it's unthinkable to her family.
I reacted very badly. I remember when the police said that. It was nonsense, but everything had to be checked. And it was better to rule out certain leads so we didn't have to worry.
The police take many statements, but nothing backs up the theory of a secret lover.
There was bound to be someone who would have said something, who would have known. She would have told someone if she'd really had a lover, and I don't see her doing that. She loved Stephen so much. She was only after Stephen. It was Stephen. Anyway, I couldn't have done that.
The investigators then check Stephen's alibi. They interview Louis Godet, his employer at the time of the incident.
Trips are planned about a week in advance, so we can tell people when they go home on Friday where they're going the week after.
The police learn that 3 days before leaving, Stephen asked his boss to change teams so he could travel with the colleagues he preferred.
If he had worked with his usual team, he would have gone home on Thursday evening. And so this time, he went home on Saturday.
The investigators embark on a more extensive investigation.
They asked my colleagues if I was really at the hotel with them. They were asking around everywhere.
The police check whether on the night of the murder, from Thursday, April 26th to Friday, April 27th, Stephen left his room at the Villars Hotel near Saint-Étienne.
And we also asked the question of whether he had time to go and come back. In particular, we looked at public transport timetables, especially the train. With the train, it wasn't possible.
The police carry out one last check. They investigate whether Stephen could have borrowed his boss's pickup truck to travel between Saint-Étienne and Saint-Germain-la-Campagne.
Only one person, in this case a subcontractor, drove the vehicle. At no time could Stephen have driven the vehicle anywhere. If he needed a lift, he was driven by the subcontractor.
Stephen's alibi is solid. It seems impossible for him to have traveled the 870 miles between his hotel and his house in Normandy overnight. His phone records confirm he didn't leave Saint-Étienne. Elise Kergal, a reporter for Paris Normandy, covered the investigation.
The police check his cell phone records, and they realize his phone signal was always in the Saint-Étienne area. So he couldn't have been in Saint-Germain-la-Campagne at the same time.
The investigators now know that Stephen couldn't have murdered his girlfriend. They turn their attention to the people around him. What if Gaëlle had been killed because of him?
It turns out that Stephen happens to use cannabis quite regularly. So there's a dealer-customer relationship here. He could owe money. There could be threats. Someone might have given his name during legal proceedings. Could Gaëlle have turned someone in? Could she have threatened to turn someone in over a debt? So we're asking these kinds of questions.
The police learn that Stephen was questioned in a drug trafficking case a few years earlier because his name was in a local dealer's address book.
When I was 18, yes, I admit I was more of a smoker.
Some of Stephen's friends say he seemed unstable back then, but his behavior wasn't cause for any concern.
He used to smoke a bit of cannabis, but I'd say he smoked less when he got together with Gaëlle. In fact, he only did it at parties, usually at the weekend.
Back then, at the time of the incident, it wasn't that serious, and it was really only occasional.
The police check Stephen's bank accounts and find out he's in debt. They wonder if the debts could be connected to his cannabis use.
I had some small debts for my first apartment. I had my first job, my first apartment, my first paycheck, quite a few parties, and I admit I missed some rent payments.
There were some payments he missed accidentally on purpose. It was just poor money management. That's all.
Things got a bit heated between the two of them. Gaëlle would ask him, "Why don't you tell me everything?"
Yes, the theory of drugs being the motive, a debt, an allegation, this lead is ruled out.
He blamed himself. "What an idiot I've been," he said. "Why did I change teams?" Because he would have come home and it wouldn't have happened. He would have come home. I said, "Yeah."
A legal investigation is opened into first-degree murder. The Rouen Investigation Unit takes charge of the case. The police carry out more interviews in the neighborhood, but none of them help advance the investigation. This brutal murder in a suburban area seems to have been committed without any witnesses hearing or seeing anything. Gaëlle Fosset's autopsy should now provide a better understanding of the sequence of events and might reveal more about the murder weapon. On April 29, 2007, the autopsy on Gaëlle Fosset's body is carried out at the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Dieppe. The first examination is an X-ray of the victim's body. The skull has several fractures. Dr. Michel Sapanet is a medical examiner. He's agreed to explain to us the probable cause of these injuries.
It suggests a violent impact against a surface or possibly a blunt, heavy, and solid object, wielded with a lot of force. But I'm leaning towards the first theory.
In other words, the victim was injured when she fell. The autopsy begins with an external examination of the body.
In this case, it's striking that for a stabbing, there are very few conventional defense wounds, which occur when a victim puts up their hands between themselves and the attacker to protect themselves from the blade. There are no deep wounds on her hands or forearms.
The medical examiner then locates and counts the wounds. He notices 2 long wounds on her scalp. Her face and neck also bear stab wounds.
In this collection of wounds, there are some that are relatively shallow, between 1 and 2 inches deep, especially on the face.
But the main area of attack is on the right side of the ribs, which have around 50 wounds. The victim was also stabbed 4 times in the back.
The wounds in her back are deep. When it comes to the rib wounds, some stop at the chest wall, while others have gone through the chest wall, injuring the lungs and the heart.
By looking at the shapes of the injuries, the medical examiner is able to describe the features of the murder weapon.
Here, what's interesting is it's a sharp edge, and there are also teeth marks on some of the wounds. So this suggests a knife that's sharp, obviously, with a single serrated blade that has small saw teeth at some point along it.
Measuring the depth of the wounds helps determine the length of the blade.
In the liver, there's a penetration of at least 4 inches, but likely more, because it also had to perforate the chest wall.
The medical examiner determines that the blade is 0.8 inches wide. At the end of the autopsy, the medical examiner confirms the victim has 66 stab wounds of various depths. Gaëlle Fosset died from massive hemorrhaging. There are no traces of sexual violence. Dr. Michel Sapanet isn't ruling out the possibility that the perpetrator tried to rape the victim.
This is a situation where you can imagine a sexual assault taking place. There's a body that's naked from the waist down, and there's this outburst of violence, which suggests a great deal of frustration. However, this doesn't mean the act was carried out. In other words, it's perfectly conceivable that the violence was the result of a refusal, for example, which is certainly possible in this case.
The medical examiner counted 66 stab wounds. It's a brutal murder with uncommonly extreme violence. The autopsy was unable to establish the order in which the stab wounds were made. Can we still imagine the sequence of events in this crime?
The medical examiner's findings give me a very clear impression that Gaëlle's killer first stabbed her 4 times with extreme violence in the back. After being stabbed, Gaëlle staggered forwards, crashed into the furniture, and fell backwards. It was when she was lying on her back that her killer flew off the handle and stabbed her dozens of times in the chest.
According to what you're saying, Jean-Marc, Gaëlle Fosset was trying to flee from her assailant when she was first attacked.
Yes, it's very likely that when Gaëlle realized she was in grave danger, she turned around to try and escape from her attacker. That would explain why she had no defense wounds on her hands, arms, or shoulders.
Gaëlle Fosset's body was found partially naked. Analysis of samples taken from her fingernails didn't turn up any DNA evidence. And the police found no trace of a fight in the living room. Does this prove that the killer undressed her when she could no longer fight back?
Not necessarily. We can also imagine that he told her to take off her pants while threatening her with the knife before he stabbed her. What is certain is that the perpetrator's first intention was to sexually assault his victim.
The medical examiner was able to determine that the murder weapon was a serrated blade, measuring at least 4 inches long and 0.7 inches wide. This describes a steak knife that can be found in most kitchens. For that matter, Stephen told the investigators that he thought a knife like that had gone missing.
If that's true, it proves the assailant didn't come armed planning to kill her.
So the murder wasn't premeditated.
That's right. I agree with Dr. Sapanet that the assailant flew into a murderous rage when Gaëlle refused his sexual advances.
When the residents of Saint-Germain-la-Campagne learned the details of Gaëlle Fosset's murder, the victim's personality, the violence, and the significant number of stab wounds, a real sense of panic breaks out across the region.
This area doesn't get a lot of crime. You hear about burglaries and drug trafficking, but there isn't a high crime rate, especially not this kind of incident. People in Saint-Germain-la-Campagne think these kinds of things happen in other places. This doesn't happen in Saint-Germain-la-Campagne. It's a small village and a good place to live. Everyone knows each other. No one expected such a horrific thing to happen in the village.
The investigators try to gather witness statements, but their local inquiries yield very few results.
These social housing types of houses have paper-thin walls, but no one heard anything, not even the dog barking.
No one saw or heard anything. No, that's impossible. The little girl who lived next door to Gaëlle, she knew when Stephen left, when Stephen came back, when Gaëlle went to her training school, and when she came back, and on that night she heard nothing. So maybe she heard something, but they don't want to say because they're scared.
The victim's neighbors seem to be terrified.
So many stab wounds. It must have been someone who's totally insane, dangerously insane, who might do it again and might indiscriminately attack anyone.
At first, the police don't rule out the theory of a prowler, so they're forced to tell the public that yes, it's a possibility. This really creates panic in the village, and even beyond. So everyone closes their shutters and locks their doors. Everyone is worried.
Benoit Negrier, a reporter for L'éveil Normand, remembers the heavy atmosphere that hung over the small village.
You could see it on people's faces, in the stores. Everyone ended up looking at each other differently. There was a state, if not of hysteria, then at least of trauma.
10 days after the murder, Daniel Boulet, the local mayor, decides to organize a public meeting in a bid to set his constituents' minds at ease.
Everyone suspected their neighbors. Something had to be done to stop it turning into a disaster or a riot.
It's a pretty delicate situation for him because he wants to reassure the public. There aren't tons of options. You have to provide information. But the problem is, 10 days into the investigation, there's very little information.
This meeting manages to bring an end to the climate of general suspicion. But as the days go by, a rumor spreads. The murder is alleged to have been committed by two individuals whose repeated run-ins with the law are no secret to anyone.
It's common knowledge that the guys in the neighboring village are thugs. They've been seen around over the last few days. They must be involved with drugs, robberies, or something. They're two brothers who are known to the police. They've been in trouble with the law and have already been to prison. They're known for what I consider minor offenses, but which mainly involved recurring violence.
The police discover that these two men, aged 19 and 21, were released from prison a few days before Gaëlle Fosset's murder. Witnesses recall seeing the two brothers near the crime scene on the night of the murder. The investigators summon and interview both individuals on June 25, 2007. Why are they rumored to be involved? What were they doing in Saint-Germain-la-Campagne the night of the murder? Did they know the victim?
They had certainly known Stephen for a long time. Not that they were friends, but in any case, they grew up in the same village. They knew each other. They also knew Gaëlle, but they knew Gaëlle as Stephen's girlfriend.
I knew the older brother a bit. I did building work with him for 2 or 3 months.
The two brothers say they went to a bar in the village on the night of the murder. But they deny going to Gaëlle Fosset's house. The victim's family find it hard to believe they had anything to do with the murder. According to them, the young woman never would have let these two individuals enter her property.
Our bedroom was on the second floor, and there was another window above the door. So she just had to open the shutters to see who it was.
I'm sure Gaëlle wouldn't have let them in.
The investigators gather various testimonies to better understand both suspects' profiles.
I knew them. For a time, I lived on their street. But clearly, no, it wasn't. Minor offenses, yes, but they're not aggressive people. Not to my knowledge.
I don't think they're bad guys. They're more like petty thieves and troublemakers.
We're talking about something else. We're talking about a terribly violent murder, maybe first degree. Without a doubt, there's a reason behind it that we don't yet understand. Anyway, there's nothing to implicate them, to arrest them, or to place them under formal investigation, which never happened.
Checks carried out on the brothers' whereabouts on the night of the murder corroborate their alibi. They are cleared by the investigators once and for all. The police rule out the theory of a crime committed by a prowler. They're convinced Gaëlle never would have opened the door to a stranger. Therefore, the murderer must be hiding among the people close to the young woman. That's when the toxicology test carried out after the autopsy revealed that Gaëlle Fosset consumed alcohol on the night of her murder. Was she alone? Did she have a visitor? The investigators urgently try to retrace her steps on her final day. On Thursday, April 26, 2007, at 8 a.m., Jean-Paul Fosset went to pick up his daughter at Saint-Germain-la-Campagne to give her a lift to Bernay, where she was doing an internship.
I needed to go to Rouen. I said, well, I'll give you a lift and I'll pick you up on the way back.
At noon, as planned, the father and daughter met up. Gaëlle then went to her parents' house for lunch, as she often did when Stephen was away for work. It was the last time Jean-Paul and Sylvie Fosset ever saw their child.
She was fine, normal. We talked about a few things. She was finding the week long because Stephen wasn't coming home until Saturday. I asked her, aren't you bored all by yourself? And she said, no, I'm fine being at home with my dog.
At 1 p.m., Gaëlle went back to work alone in her parents' car.
And then, at around 6 p.m., she leaves work to get groceries at a supermarket near Saint-Germain-la-Campagne.
She phoned her mom because she was grocery shopping at the supermarket. She called her because she didn't know what to get. And that was it. That was the last time her mom heard from her.
At 6:30 p.m., while leaving the supermarket, Gaëlle Fosset ran into her friend Eric Dupin, who she hadn't seen for a long time. In a police interview, the young man described their conversation.
Gaëlle comes up to me with a smile on her face. She tilts her head like this, all happy. And then she starts talking a bit about what's going on in our lives. She tells me, I know when it comes to my studies and my job, I'll be 100% fine. If all goes well in the next year, I'm hoping to have a baby with Stephen. And her smile was so wide. Even wider than this.
Eric Dupin recalls leaving his friend in the supermarket parking lot at 7:15 p.m. Gaëlle told him she was going home. The police know the young woman went straight home because a neighbor saw her in front of her house getting out of her car alone with her grocery bag. It was about 7:30 when Gaëlle Fosset opened the door to her house. The investigators interview all the victim's friends and family members in a bid to reconstruct her final evening and understand how someone ended up in her home.
I always told her, be very careful. Don't open the door to anyone. Keep your key in the lock. She always used to do that.
Having her dog around helped the young woman feel safe while her boyfriend was away.
I had a pet Rottweiler. He was sweet, not a guard dog, but at least he gave the impression of being one.
She really liked being home alone. She knew the dog was there and she had nothing to fear. It was a quiet area.
That evening, Gaëlle closed the shutters and put on the loungewear she wore every night.
At night, she would always wear sweatpants. I bought them for her when she was 14 and she loved them. And the t-shirt was her brother's. She wore it all the time.
These are the clothes the police found near her body.
In the evenings when she got home, she would relax and get comfortable. She would put on casual clothes and eat something in front of the TV.
Stephen knows Gaëlle was in the habit of eating dinner in her bedroom in front of the TV while waiting for him to call.
Generally, we finished work at 7 p.m., then we'd eat around 7:30 or 8, and then I'd call her. So at that time of day, she was always home.
On the night of the murder, Gaëlle and Stephen hung up the phone at 8:55 p.m. after a long conversation. According to the young man, everything seemed normal. Gaëlle didn't seem worried, so Stephen is convinced she was home alone.
That night, no, she didn't have any plans. Nothing I knew of, anyway. So she mustn't have had any plans, or she would have told me.
Gaëlle didn't make or receive any other calls that night. She didn't send any text messages and only received one.
A little after 9 p.m., she gets a text. We know she receives it and opens it then, without actually responding. The message contains a phone number that she saves in her contacts. These are the last things we know.
Everything suggests Gaëlle was about to spend the evening alone in front of the TV. However, the toxicology report on the young woman's body contradicts this theory. Her blood alcohol level shows that on the night of the murder, Gaëlle drank alcohol. To her loved ones, it's a mystery.
I can't imagine Gaëlle drinking alcohol alone.
She was very responsible. No alcohol, no drugs. She drank alcohol only very occasionally.
The only explanation for Gaëlle's family and friends is that someone came to see her unexpectedly. According to Stephen, the ashtray full of cigarette butts in the kitchen backs up this idea.
She used to smoke a bit, but it was full of cigarette butts. She must have had a visitor who smoked a lot. Because she wasn't a heavy smoker, so she would have emptied the ashtray. She clearly had a visitor who smoked a lot.
Tests on the cigarette butts show DNA from Gaëlle, Stephen, and a friend of the couple. The police find out that this individual went to their home on the weekend before the incident. After his alibi is checked, he's totally in the clear.
This proves that despite what Stephen says, Gaëlle didn't empty the ashtray regularly. It also proves that, despite what he might think, she didn't smoke with her assailant on the night of the incident.
However, the toxicology report, Jean-Marc, proves Gaëlle drank alcohol before her murder. When she died, her blood alcohol level was 0.08%. For her size, this corresponds to the ingestion of around half a bottle of wine or 3 beers. Everyone who knew Gaëlle has been very clear. The young woman never drank alone. For them, this is proof that someone visited her that evening. Do you share their opinion?
Yes, it's very likely. But above all, it proves that she let in someone she knew well enough to have a few drinks with.
However, no trace of this alcohol consumption is found. No empty or open bottles. And the tests carried out on the mug and glass taken into evidence don't reveal any fingerprints or DNA apart from the victims.
I think the perpetrator took the precaution of getting rid of everything after the murder. Remember, he tried to clean up the crime scene. That took some time. We could deduce that the killer knew he wouldn't be disturbed that night. He knew Gaëlle would be alone that evening.
The police are now working on the theory of an unexpected visit. This is based on Stephen's testimony, as Gaëlle told him she had no plans that evening, and on the young woman's phone records, which don't hint at any secret meetings.
No disrespect meant to Stephen, but we can't take everything he says at face value. Gaëlle could have
lied to him.
She could very well have lied to him. But apart from the phone records, the initial findings make me think Gaëlle really was planning on spending the evening alone. If you recall, when her body was found, the bed was unmade, and the bedside lamp and the TV in her bedroom were on. This proves to be that she was on her bed upstairs when she was interrupted by her attacker's unexpected visit.
The police are now convinced that Gaëlle Fosset knew the killer. They remember that when her body was discovered, a young volunteer firefighter, alerted by Stephen, was present. Intrigued by his behavior that night, the investigators seek to find out more about this individual. The young man, aged 24, has lived alone since he split up with the mother of his 2 children. He spends a lot of time with his friends, and Stephen has every confidence in him.
From what we know about this firefighter, he was very close to Stephen and Gaëlle. He was a friend who came over once, twice, maybe 3 times a week. He came over regularly.
He was one of my best friends at the time. We were at middle school together, so we'd known each other for a long time. He was very nice, a normal guy with his little family.
The police find out that the young firefighter visited Gaëlle 2 days before the murder. However, he must have been aware that Stephen was away.
He came to Gaëlle's on Tuesday evening, which really took Gaëlle by surprise because she told me, "I was surprised he came in the evening. He never comes over when Stephen isn't here." So I said, "What did he talk to you about?" He talked to me about problems with his partner, and that was that.
Gaëlle Fosset's parents' lawyer is also surprised that the young man was wearing his uniform on the evening the body was discovered.
He's a firefighter. He's on call, but he hasn't been called out. No one has called him out, so there's no reason for him to be in uniform. And not only is he in his firefighter uniform, but he's also equipped with all the gear for a difficult job, since he goes to get a torch. And it's not clear what reason there is to get a torch either. The call he got was, "Can you go and take a look at the house? Because I don't know what's going on. I can't get hold of Gaëlle, so we're wondering what's going on. Hasn't he somehow given himself away? Because he's the only one who knows something, and he's already wearing the uniform he would usually wear to respond to an emergency."
The police also know the young volunteer firefighter made sure he was left alone at the crime scene. Why did he ask Gaëlle Fosset's father to leave? Why did he cover up the victim's nudity with a dish towel?
The father's question, of course, is, what has he done? What is he hiding?
What's surprising is that you shouldn't touch anything at a crime scene. And as a firefighter, he should know that.
Does standard procedure get thrown out the window when it's someone you like and you're close to? These reactions, however surprising they may seem later, going, oh my God, are still very strange. He shouldn't have reacted like that. Are these the reactions of someone who's in dire straits himself? Because he's seeing someone he's friends with lying dead on the floor?
Jean-Paul Fosset will never forget the volunteer firefighter's reaction when he asked him to inform Stephen that Gaëlle was dead.
His behavior when I told him to let Stephen know was to say, "No, he's going to kill me. He's going to kill me." I don't know. I wouldn't behave like that. No, I can't. I can't tell Stephen. He's going to kill me. He's going to kill me. I don't know, it's weird.
After refusing to call Stephen, the young man walked away from the house and disappeared into the night.
I thought he had left. And as I was going around, all of a sudden, I was going towards the back of the house, and I saw him coming from the countryside. Well, I thought the firefighter left. What's he doing there? What's he doing back there? I figured later that he could have come back, seen something he'd forgotten, and then gone to hide it in the countryside. I don't know.
But why would this young man with no criminal record be involved in the murder? What could his motive be?
I knew the firefighter was attracted to Gaëlle. He thought she was very pretty. It could be that he wanted to do things to her and she didn't want to. She could have told him, "You'll see what happens when Stephen finds out." She might have told him that. And then he could have thought, "I've got to do something." That's all I can think, that he may well have wanted to have sex with her.
According to psychologist Samuel Lemaitre, frustration can indeed lead to crime.
She could have been killed by someone who was frustrated by the fact that he could not have her. And so the crime would seem to be a way to restore a sense of power and satisfaction for the perpetrator.
On May 29, 2007, investigators decide to take the firefighter into custody. He denies having any involvement in the murder. He says that on the night of the murder, he was with his ex-girlfriend between 10:15 p.m. and midnight. The mother of his children corroborates his alibi and says he was acting completely normal that night. But what did the young man do after midnight? Did he go home like he claims? The police search his home and car, but they don't find any incriminating evidence. When he's released from custody, the man is free. But to be on the safe side, his superiors ask him to leave his post for a while.
The fire department considers that from the moment he becomes a suspect, he can't carry on working at the station. So he's suspended, at least provisionally.
He has to return all his equipment. When the equipment is returned and the inventory is taken, something rather odd happens. It seems that he's returned every little thing. Then, at one point, one of his firefighter colleagues asks to open something, but it can't be opened. He says, "I've got a knife in my pocket," and he takes it out from a pocket of his uniform, which apparently had just been searched without anything being found.
The investigators are immediately alerted to the discovery. The knife is sent for testing. No traces of blood are found on the blade, nor any DNA. A while later, Stephen goes to his firefighter's friend's house with his dog. The Rottweiler starts acting strangely.
One time I went to the fireman's house with the dog, and the dog started barking and pretty much going berserk. That scared me. I left.
Like it understood what had happened, like it knew it was this man. It got to the point where we wondered if we should bring the dog and this individual together to see if the dog's reactions told us anything.
The police have never obtained a shred of evidence against the young firefighter. His repeatedly inappropriate, surprising, and suspicious behavior doesn't prove his guilt.
No one is off the hook. But as things stood, the examining magistrate deemed that there wasn't any corroborative evidence against him.
When Jean-Paul returned to his daughter's house with a copy of the keys, he was surprised to find a firefighter in uniform. He found out that the latter had been called by Stephen to check on Gaëlle. Sylvie and Jean-Paul Fosset's lawyer doesn't understand why the young man was in uniform. Do you share this surprise?
Yes, I do. This young firefighter had no objective reason to be wearing his uniform. He wasn't there on behalf of the emergency services. He was there to get answers for his friend, Stephen. But it's possible that having understood his friend's concern, he got ready psychologically and physically for an emergency.
In addition, the young firefighter behaved strangely when Gaëlle's body was found. He asked Jean-Paul Fosset to leave the scene. Then he closed the door to be alone in the house. What do you think about this behavior?
If he realized from the start that this was a murder and not an accident like he first claimed, his behavior was perfectly professional and normal. By making Jean-Paul Fosset leave the house, he spared him from seeing the horror, and on top of that, he preserved the crime scene. But it's true that he made a mistake by covering up Gaëlle's lower body with a dish towel, probably for modesty's sake, but it's the only thing we can hold against him.
There was also his refusal to tell his friend Stephen about Gaëlle's death, saying the same phrase over and over, "He's going to kill me."
Yes, Jean-Paul Fosset found that odd, just as he found it strange that the firefighter, after leaving the house, then walked away and came back. I completely understand the father's doubts. They're totally legitimate. But you can't base an investigation on impressions, on feelings that aren't backed up by material, concrete evidence.
Do you think that bringing together the firefighter and the Rottweiler could have been of any interest to the investigation?
I know that in a recent case, an attempt was made to have an animal behaviorist interpret a victim's dog's behavior when faced with a suspect. It's original, very original indeed. But I think hell will freeze over before a court accepts that as evidence.
So the police continue their investigation by looking into the individuals who regularly visited Gaëlle and Stephen. One of the couple's neighbors catches their attention. This man, who we'll call Frank, will soon become the prime suspect. The 22-year-old, who has worked for several years as a print operator at a local company, had a very disadvantaged childhood.
He comes from a poor background and had problems in his teenage years, getting into trouble with the law for minor offenses. But at the time of the murder, at any rate, he was no longer a delinquent.
During their inquiries around the neighborhood, the police questioned Frank the day after the crime.
They said to him, Gaëlle Fosset has been the victim of... Do you know her or her boyfriend, Stephen? He told them, no, I don't know them.
Which turned out to be completely untrue, because he was their neighbor, living in a house a few feet away from Gaëlle and Stephen's.
They went to the same school when they were children. They used to take the bus together.
He regularly came over to smoke joints with Stephen and play video games pretty often.
Very soon, the investigators realized the young man knows Stephen and Gaëlle a lot better than he's letting on. Why is he trying to hide his relationship with the couple? Called into the Bernay police station, he's asked to explain what he was doing the day of the murder.
So the neighbor says that on the 26th, he was at home with a friend playing video games. Then in the late afternoon, early evening, they did the dishes. And he says that at 6 p.m., he went with his friend to another friend's house for a barbecue with other people.
That's his initial story, which is then put to the test, especially when the police question his friend, who says, no, he didn't come to the barbecue. Actually, I was at his place until around 9:30 or 10 p.m., and then he didn't come to the barbecue.
Other witnesses contradict his version of events.
One of the neighbors reports seeing him outside his house at around 10 to 9. And another neighbor says she actually saw him traveling 3 times to and from the direction of Gaëlle's house, between 10 to 9 and a quarter to 11.
The police search his home and both his cars, but no incriminating evidence is found. However, his phone records revealed that he was at home when he claimed to be at his friend's barbecue. On May 29th, Frank is taken into police custody, on the same day as the firefighter and Stephen's other acquaintances. When questioned by the police, the young man gives another version of his alibi. He now states that he drove his friend back to his place around 9:45, then went home and didn't go out again that evening. While he's remanded in custody, the police find out that the suspect didn't go to work the day after the murder.
You would think, if he wanted to keep the print operator job he's had for years, it would be a good idea to arrive on time. But that day, he said he didn't get up until 2 in the afternoon.
Frank adds that he woke up when his friends rang the doorbell. One of them was Ludovic Beatrix.
He let us in. He was half asleep. He had just woken up. He didn't want to kick us out or anything. I'm not sure what we did that day, but there was nothing shocking.
Other witness accounts shed a very different light.
He decided to go to a party just after Gaëlle died in that way. Well, why not? You can still want to party. And he might not have been very close to Gaëlle, but at that party, everyone said he was acting very strangely. Something about him was off. He wasn't his usual self. So at that point, did anyone suspect him? Did anyone question his behavior?
Statements by people close to Frank reveal that he had been going through a hard time since breaking up with his girlfriend.
Every night he went to bed far too late. The next day he couldn't get up. He even stopped going to work.
He started selling everything in his apartment to make money for his stupid cocaine habit.
To be honest, at the time, he was going off the rails.
Gaëlle also noticed that he had changed. She didn't like the way he was acting. She confided this to her friend Jennifer.
Lately, she had noticed him staring at her. She felt uncomfortable around him. He would scrutinize her in a way. The way he looked at her wasn't exactly friendly.
Gaëlle had told Stephen that she didn't want Frank coming over anymore. However, he did come over the weekend before the murder.
She was still in the bedroom because it was early in the morning. She heard a noise. She went down a few steps and she saw him. She saw it was the neighbor, and she went back upstairs. She went to take a shower. She got dressed and she told Stephen, "I'm going to my parents' house because I don't want him coming over here."
That was the day when Stephen told Frank he was going away all week on a work trip. The police then learned that Frank had already come over to bother Gaëlle while Stephen was away.
This neighbor and one of his friends came over after the nightclub closed, wanting to ask Gaëlle something. They threw stones at her window. They rang the doorbell. But as soon as she saw it was them, she didn't open the door.
Stephen had gone to see him to say, "I'm going away this week. Don't visit Gaëlle. You have no reason to come to the house."
Despite the suspicions against Frank, the investigators haven't been able to gather any material evidence that could incriminate him. He's therefore released from custody. On September 28, 2007, 5 months after the murder, the magistrates finally received the results of the DNA test carried out on Gaëlle's sweatpants. From a semen stain, the DNA of 3 people is extracted, belonging to Gaëlle, Stephen, and most importantly, Frank. The investigation ramps up. At the start of October, the investigators decide to arrest the young man again. This is when they learn that he has already been in custody for several weeks at the Évreux County Jail for a sexual assault case. The crime he's accused of dates to August 17, 2007, and the police can't help but connect it to Gaëlle's murder.
He goes to the home of an underage 16-year-old girl. He knows she's alone. You can see why this is of interest to us. He knows Gaëlle is alone on the night she's killed. He goes to this young girl's home. He enters her home by breaking a window.
He slipped under her sheets like it was nothing. The sexual assault, the molestation, went on for around 45 minutes.
And this girl, of course, says no and is completely terrified. Her parents aren't there and this guy is in her bed. In the end, he's so drunk he falls asleep.
For this crime, Frank is sentenced by the Lisieux Criminal Court to 14 months in prison, with 10 months of this sentence suspended.
And now we're thinking, that's quite a coincidence. There were too many things, too many lies, too much evidence against him.
Reporter Elise Cargal also followed this sexual assault trial.
According to the psychological assessment, he has a rather complex and difficult relationship with women. He's an impulsive person who finds it hard to hold back, which can ultimately lead to a violent outburst. And this assessment also says that he has an identity disorder caused by his father's absence. That could explain the relationship he has with women.
Psychologist Samuel Lemaitre, who has carried out many assessments of sex offenders, connects this case to the murder of Gaëlle Fosset.
We can imagine that this time, he came up against a bigger obstacle that he wanted to overcome.
Gaëlle would have resisted. She would have refused. She wasn't a 16-year-old girl asleep in her bed, taken by surprise and not knowing what to do.
On October 15, 2007, Frank is arrested again by officers from the Rouen Investigation Unit.
He's taken before the magistrate. He's charged and immediately detained. He was already in jail for the other case, but this time it's with an order of detention pending trial for the Bernet and Gaëlle case.
That evening, I say to my wife, they're finally going to get the bastard.
Well, for us it seemed like a very long time. From April to October, at last.
In January 2009, when Frank has been in detention pending trial for nearly 15 months, the examining magistrate requests a second DNA assessment.
It turns out that we don't really know if in this mix of DNA, the semen comes from Gaëlle's boyfriend, or if it is in fact from this other person, the neighbor. The DNA may belong to the suspect, but it might have accidentally ended up on Gaëlle's partner's semen stain, so it doesn't necessarily tell us much.
The experts conclude that Frank's DNA found on the sweatpants may be nothing more than transfer DNA. Marie-Gaëlle Leroux-Lepagolec is an expert on DNA profiling.
Transfer DNA is DNA found on an object, but which wasn't initially deposited on this object. It was deposited on another object, and there has been contact between the first and the second object, transferring the cells from one object to the other.
This man could have sat on a chair and left a trace of his DNA, which ended up on the stain on Gaëlle's sweatpants when she sat on the same chair.
The second DNA assessment casts serious doubt on Frank's presence at the house on the night of the murder. So the suspect's lawyer gets him a conditional release after 19 months in jail. The day after the murder, the police questioned Frank as part of the neighborhood inquiries. Straight away, the young man claimed not to know Stephen or Gaëlle, a lie that immediately aroused the investigators' suspicions.
Yes, his first reaction is both surprising and naive, because everyone knows Frank regularly visited the young couple. He later explained why he lied. When he saw the police at his house as a drug user, he thought the police were coming to question him about something to do with drugs, and he didn't want to be connected to any kind of drug trafficking.
The police discovered that he acted strangely after Gaëlle's murder. The day after, he didn't go to work, and a few weeks later, he even ended up being fired for repeated absences.
Yes, but his absences didn't start the day after the crime. For a few months, Frank had been on his employer's radar and had already been sanctioned. According to the people close to him, a breakup had pushed him to take more and more drugs, which had made him antisocial.
It was later discovered that Frank went to Gaëlle and Stephen's house the weekend before the murder. And on that occasion, he would have learned that Stephen was going away all week, leaving Gaëlle on her own.
Yes, of course. That's one more piece of evidence against Frank. But it also turned out that Gaëlle didn't like him and had refused to let him in when she was home alone. That doesn't really add up with the situation on the night of the crime. The police think Gaëlle willingly let her assailant in and even had a few drinks with him.
When the first DNA results came in, revealing Frank's DNA on Gaëlle's sweatpants, the police found out that the young man was in jail for a sexual assault committed 4 months after Gaëlle's murder. At that moment, the investigators were convinced the case was solved.
Indeed, the examining magistrate placed Frank under formal investigation, while the magistrate judge immediately placed him under a criminal detention order. All the signs were against him. He lied. His alibi was half-baked. He was in a period of antisocial behavior, he was mentally fragile, and the cherry on top was he had just sexually assaulted a young woman.
In January 2009, a second DNA assessment weakened this accusation. The only material evidence against Frank was seriously called into question.
Actually, the experts were unable to determine whether the semen on the young woman's sweatpants came from Frank or Stephen. According to them, Frank's DNA could be a transfer DNA, meaning it's impossible to prove that he touched this item of Gaëlle's clothing. Further tests carried out on Frank's hands showed that he has a high transfer rate, meaning that he leaves DNA easily wherever he goes. Well, we know he went to Gaëlle and Stephen's houses on several occasions before the murder.
Today, Frank is still under investigation. The investigation is continuing as it should with the prosecution and the defense. Other leads have been followed in this case. The police are especially interested in one of Gaëlle's friends, who we'll call Karine. This young woman acted strangely before and after the murder. The day before she was murdered, Gaëlle Fosset received a visit from Karine. But their conversation soon became heated, and the two young women fell out. The next day, Gaëlle told her father what Karine had said.
She teased her about Stephen because she had always wanted to sleep with Stephen. That got Gaëlle angry, and she told Karine, "You always have problems with the guys you date, but Stephen will never be yours. He's mine."
Stephen backs up Jean-Paul Fosset's statement. Gaëlle, who was very upset, had also told him about the argument.
Gaëlle told her clearly that I was with her, that I wasn't interested, and that she had to stop imagining things. I said, "Tell her to go to hell," and that's what she did.
Jennifer Cardone knows Karine well. She isn't surprised by her provocative words.
I've seen her do that several times. In fact, we've had arguments about that, because she's pretty jealous of everything and everyone.
On May 4, 2007, Karine is interviewed by the police, but she doesn't mention her visit to Gaëlle Fosset the day before the murder. A few days later, on May 29th, the investigators decide to remand her into custody. The young woman then admits to visiting the victim on Wednesday evening, but denies arguing with her. During the interview, Karine has some very harsh words to say about Gaëlle Fosset.
She lets loose against Gaëlle, to say the least. She really gives the impression of being a spurned rival who's lost a challenge and is terribly angry. To her, Gaëlle was what you'd call easy, a girl who slept around and didn't deserve Stephen. And she also said she had problems with alcohol, drinking too much, and even needing to go to rehab.
Unsubstantiated allegations, according to Sylvie Fosset.
Rehab at 21 years old. Well, it's certainly not impossible, but we'd know about it because she was living with us up until 3 months earlier.
The police search Karine's home and find a bloodstained pair of pants, which they collect as evidence. The item of clothing is sent for analysis. The investigators then interview Jennifer Cardone, who describes her final evening with Gaëlle and Karine the weekend before the murder.
We had a girls' night out at a club. It was very uneventful until Karine met Gaëlle's neighbor. We went to a nightclub together. In the end, I left with Gaëlle and she went home with the neighbor.
The police now know that Karine and Frank, the neighbor suspected of murder, had sexual relations. Why didn't Karine mention her connection with Frank? For the plaintiffs, this revelation opens up new avenues.
You can imagine all sorts of schemes. This young woman, who had apparently slept with the neighbor a few days earlier and had a grudge against Gaëlle, might have taken a set of keys when she was there the day before, arguing with her friend.
What if Karine had stolen a set of keys when she was at Gaëlle's? And what if she had given them to Frank?
He could have opened the door unexpectedly, without Gaëlle knowing, because he had the keys. Or she could have come back with the keys she stole. All possibilities you might consider.
Hugues Vigier isn't ruling out a female murderer.
Nothing suggests that any particular strength was necessary to inflict those stab wounds. 4 stab wounds in the back by either a man or a woman. Once Gaëlle was on the floor, the others could have been inflicted.
The examining magistrate organizes a meeting between Karine and Frank, but no new evidence comes from this interview. The test results show that the blood on the pants taken during the search was Karine's, not Gaëlle Fosset's. There is currently no evidence against the young woman. Released from police custody, Corinne is now just a witness in the case. The investigation established that Corinne had a rivalry with Gaëlle and had been intimately involved with Frank. Based on this information, the plaintiff's attorney has imagined a new scenario involving a possible accomplice. What do you think?
Gaëlle's parents' attorney is, of course, playing his part in coming up with different theories. He wants to put pressure on the investigators. He's worried the investigation will peter out. To remind you, Frank was charged in October 2007, and since his release under judicial supervision in 2009, no new evidence has appeared.
Since the beginning of the investigation, several individuals known to the victim and her boyfriend have come under the spotlight. Do you think one of them could be hiding something important?
They're a small group around the same age. They all know each other. They've more or less all lied to the police. They've all behaved strangely. Personally, I'm convinced that some of them know a lot more than they're letting on.
The investigation into this case took place in the middle of reforms to the legal system. At the end of 2010, the Béarnais police investigation was closed, and the case was transferred to Évreux. In total, there have been 6 examining magistrates. Gaëlle Fosset's parents now fear that in the absence of new information, the case will be dismissed.
My husband and I used to say that we loved each other so much. She was our accomplishment. And they've destroyed all that. And I think there are no words. I was told, you'll see it gets easier, but it never does.
I can't rebuild my life until I know what happened to Gaëlle. And I don't want to rebuild anything right now. Because I'm not ready. My heart is...
You keep going, but you can't get past it. The pain is always there. It's a shock. 21 years old. We never expected her to leave us at 21 years old and in such a way. It's just not acceptable. And I think for as long as the culprits aren't taken to court, the pain will never get better. Maybe later, we'll see. But for now, it's still just as raw.
Gaëlle's loved ones are still waiting for a testimony that could revive the investigation.
In the end, Gaëlle's parents decided to make an appeal to the public by asking on the internet for anyone who knew anything to come forward. They get messages almost every day.
It's time to speak up. It's time to open your heart a little. Because how can you live like that for so many years? It's time to say, I know something and I'm going to tell you.
Gaëlle Fosset's murder was shockingly violent. The young woman was only 21 years old. She was happily and confidently building her life. She had told her mother that she wanted to have a baby once she finished her studies. But one evening in April 2007, her killer shattered her dreams and destroyed her parents' lives. Sylvie and Jean-Paul Fosset have humbly expressed their sadness and their fear that their daughter's murder will never be solved. With unwavering determination, they have embarked on this fight for the truth. Good night.